Now, we've one of the most liberal constitutions in the world, progressive and empowering. Sadly, nothing like the majority of us. The reality of living here is different. Most South Africans are opposed to same-sex relationships. 78% of our population don't want migration, and a large number want all foreign nationals deported. Women continue to be subjected to high levels of gender-based violence. So do we really believe in the Constitution and in human rights? Joining me to discuss this is Wayne Ncube from Lawyers for Human Rights, Edward Molopi from the Socio-Economic Rights Institute, and Angie Makwetla, Commissioner with the South African Human Rights Commission. Very warm welcome, all three of you. Let me start off with you, Angie Makwetla. We're not doing very well on the human rights front, are we?
Jane, good evening. We are not doing very well with human rights, but considering the fact that we come from a very long history of colonization, of apartheid, our democracy is still fairly young. I was saying earlier on that we're still in our youth stage. We haven't reached the adult stage. But having said that, our constitution is the supreme law of the country and guarantees the rights of everyone who lives in South Africa. So we need to constantly be educating our people. I don't know whether we've done any research to find out how many people actually read this little book.
I was going to ask you about that. I mean, is education a factor here? Because I think a lot of many privileged people know about the Constitution, know what they have, know what their rights are, and many of those who really need it know nothing about it.
Yes. We need to continue with our advocacy, with our communications, with outreach programs, particularly into poor and rural areas. Because if somebody doesn't know what their rights are, how then do they recognize when those rights are being violated? If a parent does not know their own rights, how will they then even know the rights of their children? So we need to just keep going on with education.
Wayne Ncube, I mean, what do you think about that? Do you think that's a key problem here, a factor in keeping a lot of people down and abused?
Yes, I think there's a big disconnect. Obviously, we still have one of the countries with the most inequality, and that lack of knowledge in terms of knowing how to access your rights and also having the economic resources to be able to protect your rights is what disconnects a lot of people from the Constitution, from the aspirations that are contained in our Bill of Rights. And I think part of the solution, obviously, is that civic education, but then a lot of it is down to access to justice. Because even if people were to know their rights, but then they're so far removed from them and they're not able to do anything with them, they're not going to have much respect or use for them. So if you go to our courts, the way our justice systems work, whether it's the criminal justice systems or the civil system, to be able to properly interact with it and protect yourself and access all your rights, you normally need lawyers and you need people who understand all the rules, and a lot of that is money, and a lot of that is class.
And Molopi, I mean, people who know their rights, is there a case here that too many of them are actually abusing what they know?
No, I wouldn't say that people are abusing what they know. So people need to exercise their democratic rights, and they need to ensure that the rights that they have, that they are protected in the way that the Constitution envisions. So that needs to happen, and we need to be seeing a lot of that taking place.
Okay, let's listen to what Cyril Ramaphosa had to say today when he was talking about the problem that we see facing many women in South Africa.
It is actually quite frightening that we now live in a country where the freedom of movement of a section of our population is now restricted. The women of our country, the girls, the young girls in our country cannot walk around freely. This right that we have in our Constitution, the right of free movement, is being denied to a section of our population. And this too must come to an end.
I mean, you say our democracy is still nascent and we're still learning and, you know, obviously all the horrors that we've got to overcome, but it's not acceptable what we're seeing happening to women. I mean, it's time for change, and what I'm struggling to get my head around is why it's taking so long. How do we unlock that problem?
Yes, it is time for change, Jane, and it is incumbent on each and every one of us who is aware of these rights to keep talking about them, to use every opportunity to talk about the rights of women, the rights of the girl child, the rights of the boy child. And who else to do that but the parent? I have got in my garage at home a stack of posters on child rights. And whenever I get an opportunity to speak at a church, at a community police forum, I take those posters and I say to each parent that is there, please put these up at home. My grandson apparently woke up this morning and said to his parents, today is human rights, and I have a right to wear whatever I like, but at least he knows that he's got rights. So we have got to keep on with this education of the people of this country so that we respect rights. But you see, when it comes to violence against women, against girls, it is what children learn in their surroundings. So we need to make sure that our communities become safe. We need to make sure that children have the right to play wherever they want to play. Tomorrow, I am going to Soweto to meet with the June 16 Foundation, which is looking into the rights of the children that were abused at a school in Soweto. And we meet with the grandmothers, with the children themselves. We mustn't forget that. We must listen to what the children say. We seldom do.
We must. I mean, that's addressing an important problem because so many kids are surrounded by violence when they're growing up. That's all they know. I mean, we've seen the violence at schools recently. How do we change that, and how do we empower them to take another path?
Well, I think it's an issue of acknowledging where the fault is and saying that we are living in a violent society, and then from that, how do we then move forward, right? And we put institutions in place, we put measures in place to ensure that everybody is safe and that people live in a constitutional democracy that we all envision.
Okay. Now, the President also touched on our electricity crisis and how it affects access to human rights.
Things like energy, housing, water, and healthcare are human rights issues. Our people have a basic human right when it comes to all these matters: energy, housing, water, healthcare, and many others. It may not be mentioned in the Bill of Rights, but it is fundamental to the dignity, the safety, the health, and the well-being of our people.
So he says that, but it's not getting there. I mean, we've seen these electrical shortouts, load shedding. So if this is a human rights abuse basically being committed by Eskom and the government, who do we hold accountable for that?
Well, the government definitely has to be held accountable to that. So all of these are socio-economic rights which are guaranteed in our Constitution, and the problem is right now, instead of them being live rights, they're progressive rights. And yes, obviously things are not going to happen immediately at the beginning of a democracy, but we have to ask whether or not there's been enough planning over the last 2 decades or so, and whether or not progressively we are starting to see a change where we start seeing better access to education, better access to water in a lot of communities, and I'm not sure that that's happening at the moment.
If the government is a perpetrator here, what's that conversation that needs to be had?
We need to hold our leaders accountable. Everybody has to be accountable. And, you know, when you actually look at the back of this Constitution, Section 237, I think it is, says diligent performance of obligations. All constitutional obligations must be performed diligently, Then it says without delay. But then the lawyers will tell you, no, there's a progressive realization
tell me
of
due
rights.
process. If I hear
And
that
yet
again, I'm
we
gonna
say this is the supreme law of the country.
But how do you hold them accountable away from the ballot box?
You see, in Section 184(3) of the Constitution, it says that the South African Human Rights Commission must call on all state departments to regularly come and report on what they are doing towards the fulfillment of the rights in the Constitution. And we have got to exercise that right. So we must hold government accountable. But then civil society must hold the South African human rights accountable. So when you know that you are being held accountable and somebody's watching you, you get off your laurels and you do your job. And good governance is of critical importance. But Jane, sometimes it just takes common sense, I think, human dignity. When you are given a job, do it to the best of your ability, especially when it comes to delivery of basic services that people
Where are we getting it right?
We have policies in place. We have a constitution that works. And so I think usually we have, in many cases, we do have progressive policies that speak to the realities of people on the ground. The problem becomes the implementation of those policies. And then also we have people on the ground who are actually, from time to time, holding the state accountable for human rights infringements, holding the state accountable for not realizing the promises that they have made to them.
Wayne Ncube, Edward Molopi, and Angie Makwetla, thank you very much.